Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro GameCore. So I just got back from the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. And this was my first time actually going to a trade show like this specifically for electronics, and so I learned a lot along the way, and I wanted to do a quick recap video about my experience. Now, if you're not familiar with CES, you're probably familiar at least with some announcements that usually surround the show itself. This is one of those events where some of those bigger companies will announce their latest and greatest product. And the majority of the show doesn't have to do with gaming at all. It used to be back in the day something that was more gaming focused, but nowadays it's more like smart home stuff and cars and things like that. But all the same, there are plenty of things that can be used for a gaming purpose, and that's specifically why I went this year. So I decided to go in with a couple of my friends from the Retro Handhelds Discord server, so Stubbs and Thor. We got our own Airbnb, we even did a recap podcast video. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. We also had a couple different parties and meetups that we attended, including one at an arcade where we met up with some other people from the Discord server as well. And so in this video, I'm going to talk you through my entire experience with CES and then also some of the products specifically, which I thought were pretty interesting. If anything, this will be a preview of some of the products that I plan on talking about in the months to come. And so without any further delay, let's jump into it. Okay, to start, when it came to gaming, probably the largest slice of the pie had to do with VR gaming and not necessarily handheld gaming. I was actually kind of amazed at how many different VR headsets and accessories were available at the show. It really felt like this was the year that all the companies went all in with VR. It just seems like there were so many new startups popping up left and right. To be honest, I'm not a huge fan of VR, at least right now in its current iteration, but I did see a few things that were interesting. Number one was the new HTC Vive headset. This one's called the XR Pro, and I think it cost around $1,100. But I did get my hands on it. I don't have any footage of that, but it was ridiculously small. And so while I don't think that $1,100 is the price range for me just yet when it comes to VR headsets, I do think it is a good sign of things to come. I think that as these headsets get smaller and smaller and the prices hopefully will decrease as well, we'll get to the point where it's just kind of a mass market appeal. But at least for now, I don't think the price point is there for me to jump in just yet. Now, the second one I saw that was kind of interesting is the PlayStation VR 2. This is their new headset, and I don't think it comes out for another couple months. But they did have some live demos that were available for consumers, but unfortunately all those got filled up before I could sign up. And so I really only saw it in a display case, and then also I saw other people using it as well. And so it looked pretty good, but I'm not really sure how to judge it just because I didn't get to test it myself. And they also had the new PlayStation controller available, the DualSense Edge. That one looked pretty good too, but also locked behind a display case, so no one got their hands on that one. Now, another thing I found kind of interesting about the whole show is that it had a weird mix of consumer products available on display. So in addition to these like high profile things from Sony and whatnot, there was also like the cheapest of cheapest controllers and things like that. And so it was kind of challenging to walk through these booths and try to discern what was basically the same kind of garbage you would find on AliExpress and those things that were actually worth paying attention to. And so it was kind of fun to weed through all the garbage and find the things that were the hidden gems. I also saw some familiar faces. So for example, the GameSir booth was there, and I met up with some of the employees I had been emailing with over the past year or so. And they didn't have a ton of new things to show off, but they do have a pretty wide range of back catalog, and so we had a look at that, as well as their newest G7 controller. Now, I'm working on a review for this controller right now, but this is an Xbox style controller, but the nice thing about it is it has these little removable plates like this, and so you can remove these plates and then swap it out for different colors and different designs and things like that. And so be on the lookout for a full review of this controller here, and I'm also looking forward to trying out some of the different plates as they get released. Now, in addition to the controls and the VR stuff we just talked about, there was also a lot of pinball kind of things available as well. There was a company there called Stern, and I think they've been around for something like 30 years, and they have a lot of new updated original pinball machines that have kind of this mixture of the old school analog pinball, but then some new electronics as well. Now, these things are pretty cool to look at and play. I mean, they were really impressive just in the amount of detail they had in each of these boards, but unfortunately the price range really just kind of outprices it from this channel here. The starting price was about $7,000 for one of these machines, all the way up to 13 grand. And so as much as I'd love to have one of those to review, I just don't think it's something that's a really good fit for the channel, but it was cool to see these. Now, there were some other pinball machines that were available in other booths. For example, there was one that had completely electronic pinball machines. Now, unfortunately, I just really wasn't a fan of these either. I don't think they really captured the feel of actually playing pinball. Now, personally, I'm not against the idea of having virtual or electronic pinball, but for me at least, the implementation at the booth that I checked out out just really wasn't there. For example, the resolution on the LCD panel they were using was super low quality, like you could see every little grain, and to me that took away from the experience. And then secondly, the input delay, like the moment you press the button to what you see on the screen, was just kind of incredibly bad. And so as much as I wanted to spend time learning about and showcasing electronic pinball, at least here at the CES show, I didn't find anything that was really compelling. But overall, I would say there were 4 different things that really caught my eye, so let's talk about each of these. The first was by a brand called MyArcade, and they have a bunch of different products that are coming out this year. One of them that was just announced last week at CES was this new Atari-style console. Now this is officially licensed, so it has all the Atari branding on it, and it has the original controllers but with a more modern feel. Inside the console itself, it looked very familiar. It looked like a typical emulation launcher, to be honest. But of course, it was limited mostly to Atari games, so Atari 2600 and 7800, and they also had a smattering of arcade titles available as well. Now unfortunately, they didn't have any of those joysticks to be available for testing, and so I didn't get my hands on them, and honestly, I haven't touched an Atari joystick in like 35 years, so I'm not sure if I'm the best judge anyway. Now another thing that MyArcade is working on, which is a little bit near and dear to my heart, are these little retro handhelds. To start, they had an Atari-themed one, and this one looked to be the handheld companion to the console we were just talking about. But in addition to the Atari games, they had licensed a bunch of other games as well, and each of these had a dedicated handheld. So there were IPs like Pac-Man and Galaga, as well as Street Fighter, Mega Man, Contra, and a couple others as well. And it looks to be that the pricing on these are going to be pretty good. They didn't have an exact figure, but it seemed to be somewhere around $30 to $50 per handheld. If anything, it kind of reminds me of the Game & Watch series devices that were released by Nintendo over the past few years. Now when it came to actually holding these handhelds, it was actually kind of unique. They had these grips on the back of them that made it pretty comfortable, but still I would say they definitely felt more like a toy than a hardcore gaming console. In addition, I found that they used rubber membrane buttons, so everything felt good there, but they did have a kind of weird circle D-pad that they were using with most of these systems. And I think that D-pad will work just fine for most of the handhelds, but when it did come to something like Street Fighter, I didn't find it to be the best. It was pretty difficult to actually do a rolling move on that, but it may just be an adjustment period that you would have to get used to. In addition, I wasn't really a huge fan of the display. They are somewhat low resolution LCD panels and they're not OCA laminated, so there's a space between the glass and the panel itself. It's not the end of the world for something that I'm hoping is going to be a pretty cheap handset, but it's not going to have very good viewing angles either way. And so I'm cautiously optimistic about these little handhelds. I don't think they're going to change the world or anything, but it is kind of neat to have this idea of walking into Target and picking up something like this for $40 and you can play Street Fighter on the go. And so hopefully I'll get my hands on a couple of these. We'll do a review of them sometime in this year. Now another device I had my hands on was the Razer's Edge. They had these out in display at the Razer booth. And I've been pretty excited about this one too because it's going to have a lot of hefty power to it, and I wanted to get my hands on it to see what the feel was going to be like as well. And to be honest, the handheld itself felt almost exactly like the V2 Razer Kishi, just with a dedicated tablet inside. And I just talked about this handheld recently in one of my Backbone reviews, and one of my complaints about it was just how wobbly phones are when you actually put them inside the controller itself. For example, here it is with a phone, and as you can see, there's just a little bit of wobble or wiggle to it when you actually move it around. And that just gives it an overall kind of cheaper feeling. Well, I'm happy to report that the device itself, the Razer Edge, does not have that wobble. They've actually perfectly placed that tablet inside, and so it feels really solid in there too. And the nice thing too is that that tablet actually comes out, so you could use that for other purposes, or you could put your phone inside the controller, use it for that as well. Now the controller part of the Razer Edge is exactly like the other one with two little distinctions. One is a headphone jack, and the other one is haptic feedback. Now, the Razer Edge is going to be in a unique position when it actually releases, because at the time of release, it will be the most powerful Android device available. They've partnered up with Qualcomm to get a proprietary chip inside, so this will be a Qualcomm Snapdragon G3X Gen 1. Now it's hard to say what that's going to do in terms of emulation performance just because they didn't have emulators installed on the machine itself, but I did try out some Android games and they worked just fine. But I think I need to get my hands on one before we can really do some accurate testing to see what kind of performance we can expect. Either way, most of the other specs are right in line with what I would want with a dedicated Android handheld. So we're looking at 128 gigs of internal storage, as well as the ability to add a microSD card slot for up to an additional 2 terabytes. In addition, we have a 1080p display which can go up to 144 Hz, so that'll be great for Android games, but really not so much for emulation. It's also got Wi-Fi 6E, which will probably improve its capability for streaming, and also have Bluetooth 5.2. Really, the only 2 points that I'm hesitant about right now are the aspect ratio of the screen. This is a 6.8-inch screen, but with a 20:9 aspect ratio. That means it's going to be super wide, much like how it is on most phones nowadays. And so we're going to have that kind of ultra-wide display that you can see on most phones, and that'll look fine for Android games, and then 16:9 games, things like streaming or PSP, will look great too. But as it stands, 4:3 content will have those big black bars on each side, just like how it is when you're trying to play games on a phone. But that being said, I don't think this is the device to play 4:3 content on anyway. You're going to want to play more of the modern games on this thing as well as do game streaming. And so while I think that 16:9 aspect ratio would have been just perfect for this device, the 20:9 is what we have to work with. And then the other thing that's probably going to be a barrier for some people is the price. This thing is going to be $400 starting out. Now, I wouldn't call that price unfair. In fact, for what you're getting, that's a pretty good price. You have the Kishi controller itself, which sells for $100, and you'll be getting that with the device itself. Plus, you're going to be getting a 1080p display with 144Hz refresh and a very powerful processor inside. And so, fingers crossed, this should be a very good emulation console when it comes to things like PS2, GameCube, and even Nintendo Switch. And I'm going to do a full review, obviously, when I actually get my hands on the device, but in the end, I think the major selling point here is going to be that it can emulate just about everything that you can do on Android. The thing that's really going to be holding it back is that there are certain emulators that just aren't available on that platform, so things like Wii U are just not possible. But either way, I do plan on making a video on the Razer Edge, so be on the lookout for that. Now, another product that kind of caught me by surprise is this one here. It's called the Artlii Play4. Now, initially, the company had invited me to come look at their booth, specifically just to look at their projectors and see what kind of image quality they could provide. And when it comes to the image quality, yeah, it's fine. It's a projector. You know, it's the same thing that you would expect from any of the projectors you can buy today. There were several different models they had available, but the one I was looking at had a 1080p resolution, and the screen could get as large as something like 224 inches. But the thing that really interested me in the Play 4 is the fact that it is Android TV certified. And so this one actually has a CPU inside. It's an Amlogic chipset, and it also is certified, so that means they can play high resolution for things like Netflix, Disney Plus, things like that. And the platform it's running on is Android TV 10, which means that you don't have to worry about things like scope storage. And because it has a couple USB ports on the back, that means you could take a flash drive, load it up with your favorite ROMs and emulators, and then start playing directly on the projector. And so you probably see where I'm going with this one. You could actually take this projector, load it up with a flash drive, put all your stuff on it, and then that would be a home console and the TV in one. And so honestly, that's kind of exciting to me. I like the idea of being able to take this thing camping and then be able to play Street Fighter on a big screen without having to bring anything else other than your controllers. And so after having a conversation with the company, they are going to send me a review unit. So I'll do a review on this projector. I'm kind of excited to see what kind of gaming potential we can have within it. Either way, that's the third device that I saw that was kind of interesting at CES. And so now the last one, which was the Pimax Portal. Now I've kind of already built up a history with Pimax. Last month I was in California and they were having a big reveal show, and so they invited me to go to that. And so I went to that in Los Angeles and checked their product out back then. And so seeing their booth here at CES was just a continuation of the conversation that I started last month. Now, I have enough footage to actually do a dedicated Pimax Portal preview video, so I'm going to work on that and I'll probably release it in the next week or two. But really quickly, I will say that this is also a very powerful Android-based handheld, but this one has some unique traits to it as well. For example, you can pay extra and get a VR headset and then slide it right in and make it a VR console as well. Now, honestly, like I mentioned earlier in the video, I'm not a huge VR guy, and so maybe this will actually help me with that transition over, but mostly I just focused on the retro handheld gaming prospects of the device itself. Now, the chipset inside is a modified version of the Snapdragon 865, so that means it's going to be plenty more powerful than the Odin and one of the more powerful handhelds that are going to be available this year. For example, one of their employees did have some emulators and ROMs and stuff installed on their device, and they let me try it out, and yeah, it was really impressive. And we'll talk more about that in that preview video, but yeah, it's going to be great for emulation. Now, another thing that's impressive about the Pimax Portal is that it is modular, and so you can pull out those controls, they're detachable, you can flip them on their side like a Nintendo Switch controller and have like a party mode as well. In addition, they're going to be offering a dock as well, and so you could dock this thing up, pull out the controllers, and just have like a party right then and there on your TV. And then also consider the fact that this could be used for VR or just regular handheld gaming, and we've got a device with a lot of potential. Additionally, one of the other things that's really compelling to me is that the price is not bad. We're looking at $299 for the starter level model. That'll include the base handheld, which has an LCD LCD panel, which is actually in 4K, so it's a really high resolution display as well. And thankfully, this is a 16:9 aspect ratio, so not 20:9 like the Razer Edge. Anyway, I don't want to get ahead of myself when it comes to showing off this device. I'll do a dedicated preview video here in the future, but suffice to say, I'm pretty excited about this one too. And so really, that's about it for my CES wrap-up. I just wanted to show kind of a little bit of my experience overall, and then some of the little diamonds in the rough that I found as I walked around all of the trade show. And I gotta say, the entire thing was just massive. There was something like over 100,000 people there alone just for CES. And so unfortunately, I actually didn't get to see every single booth that I wanted, but the ones that I did see were pretty cool. Anyway, let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.